On Monday morning, April 6, 1998, two Caterpillar bulldozers rolled through the south gate of Walter Miller's farm. Behind them came six gravel trucks, a survey pickup, and a white Chevrolet Suburban, carrying three men in clean boots and company jackets. Walter stood beside his 1953 Farmall Super M as the first bulldozer crossed the old fence line. He was 72, lean from a lifetime of physical work, with faded overalls and hands shaped by wire, grease, and winter cold. He raised one hand. The bulldozer operator stopped. A man stepped out of the Suburban. Richard Vale was Prairie Dominion Agri-Systems Regional Development Director. He was 46, confident, polished, and responsible for keeping the corporation's new Nebraska project on schedule. He looked at Walter, then at the narrow strip of weeds between County Road 14 and the construction site. "Is there a problem, Mr. Miller?" Walter pointed toward a limestone marker almost hidden beneath the grass. "That machine crossed my line." The project engineer, Daniel Cross, opened a survey map across the hood of the Suburban. "We have a recorded access easement," Daniel said. "For the old Benson farm," Walter replied. "Prairie Dominion owns the Benson property now," Richard said. "The land, yes." Walter looked at the bulldozer. "The passage, no." Richard glanced at the rusted fence, the weeds, and Walter's faded tractor. Then he smiled. "This is a $38 million project. We're not stopping over 26 feet of grass." Walter walked to the limestone marker. "You cross this line with commercial equipment, you won't have a road when you need one." Richard laughed softly. One of the contractors behind him smiled. Walter did not argue. He rested a hand on the Farmall's steering wheel. "I warned you once." Then he climbed onto the tractor and drove toward his barn. Over the next 8 weeks, Prairie Dominion spent more than $4 million building an industrial access road across that boundary. The road was wide enough for 2 tractor-trailers to pass. It had reinforced culverts, underground utilities, a rebuilt bridge, and 18,000 tons of gravel. But every dollar depended on the first 26 feet. And those 26 feet did not belong to Prairie Dominion. By the time the corporation discovered what Walter knew, the largest private construction project in Holt County had no legal road leading into it. Red Creek, Nebraska, had 1,400 residents, 1 grain elevator, 2 churches, a feed store, and a courthouse built from pale limestone. For decades, the town had watched family farms disappear. Young people left for Omaha. Small operators sold to larger ones. Equipment grew more expensive, while margins grew smaller. So when Prairie Dominion announced plans for a grain processing and seed storage complex outside town, people wanted to believe it would save Red Creek. The corporation promised 120 permanent jobs. It promised trucking contracts, construction work, higher land values, and enough new tax revenue to repair county roads. At the public meeting in January, Richard Vale stood inside the high school gymnasium and displayed drawings of concrete silos, loading bays, rail connections, and a modern processing plant. "This facility will keep Red Creek alive for another generation," he said. The audience applauded. Walter Miller sat in the third row with his hat in his lap. His granddaughter Sarah sat beside him. Sarah was 31 and taught history at the local high school. She had spent years encouraging Walter to retire, lease out his acres, and stop repairing machinery older than she was. She noticed him studying the access map on the last page of Prairie Dominion's packet. "What is it?" she whispered. Walter tapped a thin line entering the project from the south. "They're using the old passage. It says they have access. It says something." He folded the packet and slipped it into his coat. He did not confront Richard that night. Walter had never opposed the project itself. He had helped neighbors install irrigation systems, harvested fields for injured farmers, and loaned machinery without charging more than fuel. He was not protecting 26 feet of dirt because he hated change. He was protecting the right to decide what crossed land his family had kept for nearly 90 years. Walter's grandfather, Samuel Miller, had bought the farm in 1909. The Millers had survived drought, grasshoppers, bank pressure, and the farm crisis of the 1980s. They had sold cattle and postponed repairs, but they had never sold the narrow strip along the South Road. Walter's father used to walk the boundary with him every spring. "A fence can rot," he once said, "but a man's word shouldn't." Walter had been young then. He thought his father was talking about wire. Prairie Dominion had purchased 3 adjoining farms, totaling nearly 1,900 acres. The original plan placed the main entrance on the north side of the property. But the northern ground was soft and crossed by a seasonal creek. Building there required a new bridge, additional permits, and months of review. The south entrance was faster. It connected directly to the county road. It also crossed Walter's land. During the title review, Daniel Cross found a recorded document from 1936. It granted the Benson family passage across the Miller property after a flood destroyed their original access road. Daniel sent it to Prairie Dominion's legal office. A junior attorney replied with a short opinion. Recorded access appears transferable with the dominant parcel. No one requested the original deed. No one contacted Walter. 2 weeks before construction began, Daniel visited the site with a survey crew. Their digital map placed the boundary 11 feet from the old fence. But beneath the weeds, they found a limestone marker stamped with an M and the date 1936. Daniel photographed it. "This should be verified," he told Richard. "The old survey and our map don't match." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Richard looked at the construction schedule. Prairie Dominion had already hired contractors, booked gravel deliveries, and rented heavy equipment. A delay could cost tens of thousands of dollars a day. "Legal says we have access." They reviewed a copy. "Is there anything proving we can't proceed?" "Not yet." "Then proceed." Daniel looked again at the marker. Richard closed the survey file. "We're not letting a stone buried in weeds rewrite a $38 million schedule." That afternoon, a contractor pulled the marker from the ground. Walter saw it from his field. He drove over on the farmall. "Put that back." The foreman stopped. Richard, who was standing nearby, walked over. "It's inside the construction corridor. It marks my boundary. We have a licensed survey." Walter pointed to the stone lying beside the excavator bucket. "That marker was set before your company existed." Richard turned to the foreman. "Clear the corridor." The excavator pushed the limestone marker into a mound of dirt. Walter watched it disappear. Several workers looked away. Richard said, "You can file a survey complaint after the road is finished." Walter stared at him. "You know where the line is now." Richard stepped closer. "I know this town needs jobs more than it needs another argument about your grandfather." That was the moment the disagreement became personal. 3 days later, Richard entered Red Creek Feed and Grain and found Walter at the counter. 7 farmers were drinking coffee near the front window. Walter placed a box of cultivator bolts beside the register. "You need to stop those trucks." Richard removed his sunglasses. "Our lawyers reviewed the easement." "Did they review the original?" "They reviewed what was recorded." "That isn't what I asked." Richard smiled toward the men drinking coffee. "Mr. Miller believes an agreement written for wagons should control a modern industrial project." 2 farmers laughed. Walter kept his eyes on Richard. "The agreement controls the land. You're reading horse and wagon language in the age of diesel trucks. The words didn't get old because your trucks got bigger." The laughter stopped. Richard took a document from his jacket. "We'll pay you $50,000 for the strip." Walter did not touch it. "You're not buying a strip." "What am I buying?" "The right to decide what crosses it." Richard shook his head. "This project will employ 120 people. You're holding a town hostage over weeds and an old family story." Walter's face changed slightly. Not anger. Something colder. "You crossed before you asked. Everybody has a price." "Maybe." Walter picked up the bolts. "But you still don't understand what you need." He walked out. By lunchtime, the story had spread through Red Creek. But it had changed. At the diner, people said Walter was demanding money. At the co-op, someone claimed he wanted $1 million. The local newspaper quoted a Prairie Dominion representative saying that one private landowner was threatening jobs and public investment. Walter's name was not printed. It did not need to be. Sarah found the newspaper on his kitchen table. "They're making you look greedy." Walter continued cleaning a carburetor. "People believe what fits the story they already like. You need to tell them the truth." "I told the man driving the bulldozers." "That isn't enough." Walter looked toward the south field, where gravel trucks crossed every few minutes. It was enough to give him a choice. That evening, Walter pulled an old metal box from beneath his bed. Inside were deeds, survey notes, tax receipts, and letters tied with string. He unfolded a document dated March 1936. Sarah sat across from him at the kitchen table. "What does it say?" Walter turned the deed toward her. "Read the 4th paragraph." Sarah read it silently. Then she read it again. Outside, a truck changed gears on the new road. She looked up. "They can't?" Walter raised one finger. "Don't say it yet." "Did their lawyers miss this?" They saw what they expected to see. You have to show them. I warned them. That isn't the same thing. Walter folded the deed. If a man is driving toward a washed-out bridge and you tell him the bridge is gone, you don't owe him a drawing of the river. The next morning, Walter mailed Prairie Dominion a certified letter. It stated that the corporation had no commercial right to use his property. It demanded that all construction traffic stop immediately. It warned that continued crossings would be documented. Richard signed for the letter himself. He forwarded it to legal. The response came back before lunch. Landowner appears to be positioning for enhanced compensation. Continue operations pending negotiation. Richard placed the warning in a project file. Then he ordered the contractors to work Saturdays. Walter did not block the road. He did not damage equipment. He did not threaten drivers. Every morning, he carried a wooden chair to the cottonwood tree near the boundary. He sat with a notebook and a camera. He recorded each truck, time, license number, company name, direction of travel. When workers removed another section of his fence, he photographed it. When graders widened the road into his field, he photographed that too. When heavy rain sent muddy runoff into his drainage ditch, he collected water in glass jars. The town saw an old farmer sitting beside a construction road. Most people thought he had lost. Prairie Dominion moved faster. It installed reinforced culverts. It raised the roadbed 4 feet. It buried power and communication lines. It rebuilt the bridge over the drainage ditch. Inside the project, crews poured foundations for 6 silos and prepared for the largest continuous concrete pour in county history. The company's lender required the first 2 silos to be completed before July 20th. A railroad agreement required the loading area to remain on schedule. The main concrete pour was booked for July 16th. More than 90 trucks were scheduled. A rented crane cost $18,000 a day. If access was interrupted, Prairie Dominion would lose far more than construction time. It could lose financing, rail priority, and its first harvest contracts. By the end of May, the access package had cost just over $4 million. Not all of that money had been spent on Walter's 26 feet, but every culvert, utility line, bridge improvement, and truck lane depended on those first 26 feet being legal. They were not. In June, Prairie Dominion applied for its permanent operating permit. A county clerk named Melissa Rowe reviewed the access documents. She compared the 1936 filing with the current parcel map. Then she noticed the 4th paragraph. She took the document to the county attorney. The county attorney asked one question: where is the commercial easement signed by Walter Miller? Prairie Dominion did not have one. 2 days later, the county suspended the access portion of the permit application. Richard drove to Walter's farm with a leather folder. Walter was repairing a sickle bar behind the barn. "We need to settle this," Richard said. "I tried in April." Richard opened the folder. $250,000 for a permanent easement. Walter drove a rivet into the sickle section. "No, you haven't read the offer." "No, that strip isn't worth $20,000. "Then use somebody else's." Richard closed the folder. "We spent $4 million building that road." "I know. You watched us. I wrote to you. You knew the county might stop us." Walter looked up. "I knew you didn't have permission." Richard's voice hardened. "You let us keep spending. I don't control your money." Richard returned 3 days later with a $500,000 offer. Walter refused. Prairie Dominion then offered $1.2 million. Sarah stared at the number. "That's more than this whole farm may be worth." Walter looked out the kitchen window. "No, it's what the road is worth to them. You could take it and still protect the farm with conditions." "They already had conditions." Sarah said nothing. Walter tapped the folded deed. "They didn't ignore this because it was unclear. They ignored it because they thought I was too small to matter." Prairie Dominion's Public Relations Office released another statement. It claimed Walter was endangering local employment for personal financial advantage. At the feed store, men who had known Walter for 40 years stopped speaking when he entered. One contractor whose son expected a job at the plant confronted him outside the post office. "You get your money, Walter, but don't pretend this is about principle." Walter looked at him. "They offered me $1.2 million. The man's expression changed. Walter continued walking. The following day, Sarah visited the county records office. She found copies of Walter's certified warning, Prairie Dominion's receipt, and the access filing. She also found something else. An internal project attachment had been submitted with the permit application. Daniel Cross had written a note 6 days before construction began. Boundary marker conflicts with digital survey. Original grant should be reviewed before commercial access is assumed. Richard had signed the schedule approval beneath it. Sarah made a certified copy. For the first time, they could prove the corporation had not merely made a mistake. It had seen the risk and chosen the deadline. The hearing took place on July 14th, 2 days before Prairie Dominion's scheduled concrete pour. The courtroom was packed. Farmers, contractors, reporters, and county officials filled the benches. Richard sat behind 3 corporate attorneys. Walter wore the brown suit he had worn to his wife's funeral. Sarah sat behind him with the metal box at her feet. Prairie Dominion's attorney argued that the easement had served the adjoining property for more than 60 years. The corporation had relied on a recorded access right, he said. Stopping the road would cause enormous economic harm. Walter's attorney, Thomas Bell, rose slowly. This case is not about whether Prairie Dominion's project is useful, he said. It is about whether a private agricultural kindness can be converted into an industrial highway without the landowner's consent. He placed the original deed on the evidence table. The judge turned to the 4th paragraph. Until that moment, the full language had not been read publicly. Thomas Bell asked the corporate attorney to read it aloud. The attorney hesitated. Then he began. Said passage shall serve the adjoining farm for private agricultural use. People in the courtroom leaned forward. The attorney continued, and shall not transfer or continue for industrial, municipal, or commercial enterprise. The room went still. The judge read it again. Prairie Dominion argued that the language was outdated. Thomas Bell called Earl Benton, Holt County's retired surveyor. Earl presented the old boundary map and the photograph of the limestone marker. The county road ends here, he said. The Prairie Dominion parcel begins here. The land between them belongs to Walter Miller. A corporate attorney pointed to the easement. But access crossed that land for decades. With Miller permission, Earl replied. For a farm, not for an industrial complex. Thomas Bell then presented Walter's certified letter. Prairie Dominion had received it before the first load of gravel was spread. Next came Daniel's survey warning. Richard's signature was beneath it. The judge looked toward the corporation's table. You were told the boundary required verification? Richard answered carefully. We believed the recorded easement controlled. You were also told the original grant required review. Yes. And you proceeded before obtaining that review. Richard did not answer immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Finally, Thomas Bell placed Walter's notebook on the table. 647 commercial crossings, each documented after written warning. Prairie Dominion's attorney said an injunction would endanger contracts, jobs, and millions of dollars. The judge closed the notebook. The alleged harm appears to result from a decision to build first and establish the right later. At 4:12 that afternoon, the court issued a temporary injunction. No Prairie Dominion vehicle, employee, contractor, or commercial delivery could cross Walter Miller's parcel. The company's permanent operating permit remained suspended. The concrete pour scheduled for Thursday could not proceed through the south entrance. Prairie Dominion had 36 hours before the rail contractor exercised its delay clause, and it had no other completed road. At 6:15 the next morning, the first concrete truck reached the south gate. Sheriff Tom Keller had placed a steel barrier across the entrance. The injunction notice was attached to it. The driver read the order and called his dispatcher. Behind him came 3 gravel trucks and a lowboy carrying a crane component. By 7 o'clock, the line stretched half a mile down County Road 14. Workers stood inside the project. The foundations were ready. The crane was rented. Concrete crews had arrived. But the 90 trucks scheduled for the pour could not enter. The $4 million access road was smooth, wide, and nearly new. But Prairie Dominion could not legally use its first 26 feet. Without those 26 feet, the rest of the road led nowhere. Richard arrived shortly after 8. People from Red Creek had gathered along the county road. Some were reporters, some were contractors. Several were the same men who had laughed at Walter in the feed store. Walter came down the field on his farmall. In the rear carrier were cedar posts, wire, and a post driver. He stopped beside the original boundary. Then he climbed down and began rebuilding the fence Prairie Dominion had removed. Richard walked toward him. You planned this. Walter lifted a post. No. You waited until the project was trapped. I warned you before the first machine crossed. You knew what the deed said. So did your lawyers. You could have shown me. Walter set the post into the ground. You buried the marker after I showed you where it was. Richard glanced toward the people watching. We offered you $1.2 million. Walter began driving the post. You offered money after you took the road. You've proved your point. Walter stopped. No. The court proved the point. Richard lowered his voice. What do you want? Walter looked past him at the trucks and the unfinished silos. I wanted you to stop before you crossed. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Walter returned to the fence. Behind Richard, one of the concrete trucks turned around. Then another. By noon, every truck had left. The largest concrete pour in Holt County history had been canceled. Walter could have demanded a fortune. He could have kept Prairie Dominion's equipment trapped behind the injunction. He could have tried to destroy the entire project. He did none of those things. Through Thomas Bell, he offered a 10-day supervised exit period so the corporation could remove heavy equipment. In return, Prairie Dominion had to abandon all claims to the south easement. It had to rebuild the fence, restore the drainage ditch, replace the removed topsoil, compensate for crop damage, and uncover and reset the 1936 boundary marker. The company also had to construct the northern entrance from its original engineering plan. At a settlement meeting, one Prairie Dominion executive asked why Walter had refused $1.2 million, but accepted an agreement that made him far less money. Thomas Bell answered, because Mr. Miller was never selling. Prairie Dominion accepted. Construction stopped for 8 months. The corporation lost its original rail schedule, paid contractor penalties, and built a reinforced northern bridge across the seasonal creek. Richard Vail was removed from the project before the plant opened. Daniel Cross remained to supervise the new entrance. Before leaving Red Creek, he visited Walter's barn. Walter was changing the oil in the farmall. I should have stopped the survey, Daniel said. Walter wiped his hands. You should have finished it. I let the schedule decide. Walter handed him an oil filter wrench. Schedules are useful, he said, right up until they start making decisions. Daniel helped him finish the job. Prairie Dominion eventually completed the processing plant. It created jobs. It bought local grain. Walter never objected once the corporation began using its own road. When someone at the feed store accused him of changing his mind, Walter replied, I never said they couldn't build it. I said they couldn't build their road on me. The south entrance disappeared beneath grass. The fence was rebuilt. The limestone marker was reset beside an iron post where no future survey crew could overlook it. Years later, Sarah preserved the 1936 deed and hung it in the farmhouse hallway. Beneath it, she placed a photograph from the morning of the injunction. Walter stood beside the fence with his old farmall behind him. Across the barrier, a line of modern trucks waited on a road their corporation had spent $4 million to build. Sarah added one sentence from Walter's notebook. A property line is only a line until someone decides it doesn't matter. Prairie Dominion had money, lawyers, engineers, and machines from 3 states. Walter Miller had 26 feet of land, 1 written warning, and the patience to let the truth arrive on its own. That was why the old farmer warned them only once. He knew the line would speak for itself when they finally crossed it.